I thought the funeral would be the worst of it, but the real violence started in the lawyer's conference room. When my sister Veronica stood up and screamed that I was a leech who deserved nothing. The room went dead silent, but I did not look at her. I looked at Graham Pell, our family trustee. He did not look shocked. He simply checked his wrist. And that was the moment I realized this was not just grief talking. It was a rehearsed performance. The drive back to Briar Glen felt less like a homecoming and more like a surrender to gravity. The Pennsylvania Turnpike was a ribbon of gray concrete under a sky that looked like a bruised peach, threatening snow but never quite delivering it. I kept the radio off. Silence felt safer. Silence did not ask me how I was feeling or if I had processed the fact that my father was dead. I was 33 years old. I had a life in Chicago that consisted of a mid-level marketing job, a cactus I struggled to keep alive, and a studio apartment that cost too much. But as I passed the rusted welcome sign of my hometown, that life evaporated. I was just Kylie again, the quiet one, the one who left. My father, Thomas Ward, had died on a Tuesday morning of a sudden cardiac event. It was the kind of death people called a blessing because it was fast. But they only said that when they did not have to clean out the refrigerator or cancel the cable subscription afterwards. I was not crying. I had not cried since I got the call. I felt a profound, metallic numbness, a focus on logistics that felt like armor. I had a list: funeral home, florist, obituary, utilities, lawyer. If I kept moving, I would not have to stop and realize that the house on Elm Street was empty. I parked my rental car in the driveway. The house looked tired. The gutters were full of wet leaves, and the paint on the porch railing was peeling in long white strips like dead skin. I made a mental note to call a handyman. That was manageable. Grief was an ocean, but a peeling railing was just a task. The next morning, I put on my only black blazer and drove to the center of town for the reading of the will. Graham Pell's office was located in a brick building that had housed 3 different banks over the last 50 years. Now it smelled of lemon polish and old paper. Graham was a fixture in Briar Glen, the kind of man who served on the library board and shook hands with 2 hands. He had been my father's trustee and friend for as long as I could remember. When I walked in, Graham was already sitting behind his heavy oak desk. He stood up, but he did not come around the desk to hug me. He gestured to a leather chair. "I am so sorry for your loss. Kylie," he said. His voice was smooth, practiced. "Thank you, Graham," I said. "I just want to get this sorted out. Dad was organized, so I assume this will be straightforward." Graham sat down and adjusted his cuffs. He looked at a file folder in front of him, then moved it an inch to the left. He did not look at me. "Well, these things take time," he said. "It is the usual process. We have to inventory the assets, clear the debts, and wait for the probate period. It is all very standard." He said the phrase usual process with a strange emphasis, as if he were trying to convince himself. I watched his hands. They were trembling slightly. Just a tremor in the fingers, like a guitar string after it has been plucked. "Is there a problem?" I asked. No, he said quickly. "No problem. Just the usual process." The door to the outer office banged open. The heavy wood slammed against the wall, vibrating the framed diplomas. I turned around. Veronica was here. My sister was 5 years older than me, and she took up space in a way I never could. She wore a coat that looked like it cost more than my car, and her hair was a perfect, rigid helmet of blonde. She did not look at me. She marched straight to the chair next to mine, dropped her designer bag on the floor with a heavy thud, and glared at Graham. "Start," she said. "Veronica," Graham said, his voice tightening. "Good morning. I was just telling Kylie that—" "I do not care what you were telling Kylie." Veronica interrupted. She turned to me then, her eyes hard and bright. "You are here early. Trying to get a head start?" I arrived on time. "Veronica," I said. My voice sounded thin in the heavy room. She scoffed. A sharp, ugly sound. "You were never on time when he was alive. You could not be bothered to drive 5 hours to see him when he was sick. but you are the first one here when the checkbook opens. I felt the old dynamic slide over me like a suffocating blanket. When we were children, Veronica was the loud one, the demand, the fire. I was the water. I learned to be still, to be quiet, to make myself invisible so her rage would pass over me. I felt my shoulders hunching now, an automatic reflex. I came to visit at Christmas, I said softly. Christmas, she mocked. You came for a day. I was here every week. Kylie, every single week. I drove him to his appointments. I picked up his prescriptions. I managed his life while you were playing city girl. Graham cleared his throat. Please, let us keep this civil. Thomas wanted. Dad did not know what he wanted. Veronica snapped, turning back to Graham, especially not at the end. His mind was going, we all know that. I sat up straighter. That is not true. I spoke to him 2 days before he died. He was lucid. He was fine. Veronica laughed. It was a cold, jagged sound. Lucid? He was confused. Kylie. He was lonely, and he was vulnerable to manipulation. She looked at Graham. I want the trust frozen. Graham blinked. Veronica, we cannot just freeze. I said I want it frozen, she shouted. She slammed her hand on the desk. I am contesting the validity of any changes made in the last 6 months. I know she was in his ear. I know she was asking for money. I stared at her. I never asked him for a dime. You are a liar, she hissed. She leaned toward me, and I could smell her perfume, something heavy and floral that masked the scent of stale cigarettes. You have always been a leech. Kylie, you took his money for college. You took his money for that apartment, and now you want to take what is left. You never earned a thing in your life. You just bleed people dry. The word leech hung in the air, vibrating. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap, not an explosion. It was the sound of a wire finally pulling tight enough to sing. I looked at Graham. He was looking at his watch. He was not stopping her. He was not defending me. He was checking the time. I stood up. My legs felt steady, which surprised me. I am not doing this today, I said. My voice was low, but it did not shake. Read the will, Graham, or don't. But I'm not sitting here and being abused. I walked out. I heard Veronica shouting something behind me, something about my entitlement, but I kept walking. I went past the receptionist who was pretending to type, out the heavy door, and into the cold November air. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, but my hands were fists. I drove back to the house and sat in the kitchen. The silence was different now. It was not safe anymore. It was waiting. I needed to do something. I needed to be practical. I grabbed the stack of mail that had accumulated on the counter. Graham had given me a folder of documents before Veronica arrived. A courtesy copy of the trust summary. I opened it. The numbers were neatly arranged in columns. The house, the small life insurance policy, the savings account. It was not a fortune, but it was enough to pay off my student loans and maybe put a down payment on a condo. I flipped to the most recent quarterly statement for the trust account. I scanned the dates. October 15th, balance verified. I frowned. I looked at the calendar on the wall, the one my father had marked with doctor's appointments in his shaky handwriting. My father died on November 2nd. The statement date was October 15th, but the transaction list showed a withdrawal on October 28th for administrative fees and another for maintenance. I pulled out my phone and called Graham's office. I got his voicemail, but he called back 10 minutes later. Kylie, he said, look, about what happened. I do not care about Veronica, I said, cutting him off. I am looking at the trust statement you gave me. The dates seem off. There is a verified balance date that lists transactions from weeks before the date of death, but the closing date on the statement is listed as mid-October. There was a pause, a long, static-filled silence. Oh, that, Graham said. His voice was casual, too casual. That is just a mailing delay. The system auto-generates the dates based on when the print cycle runs. It is confusing. I know. We have been meaning to update the software. But the transactions, I started, It is fine. Kylie, he interrupted. It is just a display error. The numbers are correct. Trust me, it is the usual process for that bank. He hung up before I could ask another question. I sat there, staring at the paper, mailing delays, display error. I worked in marketing. I knew about display errors. Banks did not have display errors on legal statements. A knock at the back door made me jump. I walked over and peered through the glass. It was Marla Haynes, the neighbor from next door. Marla was 70 years old, wore sensible sneakers, and knew everything that happened on Elm Street within 15 minutes of it occurring. She was holding a foil-covered dish. I opened the door. "I brought you a lasagna," she said. "It is frozen, so you can stick it in the oven whenever. You have to eat." "Thank you, Marla," I said, taking the heavy dish. "That is very kind." She stepped inside without asking, wiping her shoes on the mat. She looked around the kitchen, her eyes sharp. "How was the lawyer?" she asked. I sighed. Veronica was there. Marla nodded knowingly. "That girl has always been a firecracker, and not the good kind, the kind that blows up in your hand." I put the lasagna on the counter. Marla leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms. "You know," she said, her voice lowering, "I was surprised to see you here alone." "What do you mean?" "Well, Graham was here so much this last year. I figured he would be helping you pack." I froze. "Graham? Graham Pell?" "Yes," Marla said. "He was over here 2 or 3 times a week, usually on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Sometimes he stayed late. I saw his car in the driveway until 10 o'clock at night sometimes. My father never mentioned Graham visiting that often. He told me he saw Graham once a month for lunch." "Are you sure it was Graham?" I asked. Marla huffed. "I have lived next door to your father for 30 years. Kylie, I know what Graham Pell looks like, and I know his car. That silver sedan. He was here. I assumed they were working on business." "Business," I repeated. I remembered the tremor in Graham's hands, the way he wouldn't look at me, the usual process. Marla stayed for tea, chattering about the neighborhood association and the new potholes on Main Street. But I was only half listening. When she finally left, the house felt even bigger and much colder. Graham had been here, late at night. I went into my father's study. It was a small room off the living room, lined with bookshelves filled with history biopics and old encyclopedias. His desk was a massive roll-top antique that he loved. I sat in his chair. It smelled like peppermint and old paper. I ran my hand over the wood. I needed to understand. If Graham was here, there had to be a record. My father kept everything. He was a creature of habit. I started opening drawers, pens, rubber bands, a stack of greeting cards he had bought but never sent, a checkbook register. I opened the bottom drawer. It was filled with hanging files. Taxes 2018, taxes 2019, house deed. I pulled the files out, one by one, stacking them on the floor. I reached into the back of the drawer to see if anything had fallen behind the metal track. My fingers brushed against something taped to the inside of the drawer's back panel. It felt like an envelope. I knelt on the floor and peeled it off. The tape was yellow and brittle. It had been there for a while, but not decades, maybe a year or 2. It was a plain white envelope, no name on the front. I opened it. Inside was a single index card. The handwriting was not my father's. It was blocky, all caps, written in blue ink. "Ask for the ledger. Do not trust summaries." There was a date written in the corner. August 12th, 2 p.m. That was 3 months ago. There was no signature. I stared at the card. "Ask for the ledger." I looked at the folder Graham had given me. The cover sheet said, "Estate Summary." My stomach twisted. This was not a movie. This was my father's boring, suburban life. People did not tape notes inside drawers in Briar Glen. But someone had. I put the note in my pocket. I did not want to leave it in the house. I needed coffee. Real coffee, not the instant stuff in the cupboard. And I needed to get away from the house. I drove to the diner on the edge of town. Patty's Place. It was the kind of diner that had not changed its menu since 1990. I sat in a booth near the window and ordered a black coffee and a slice of cherry pie I did not want. I was staring at the steam rising from the cup. turning the index card over in my mind, when a man in a windbreaker walked up to my table. "Kylie Ward?" he asked. I looked up. "Yes?" He dropped a thick envelope on the table. It landed with a heavy slap that made my coffee jump. "You have been served," he said. He turned and walked away before I could speak. The diner went silent. The waitress stopped pouring water. The couple in the next booth stopped chewing. Everyone was looking at me. I opened the envelope. My hands were shaking. Superior Court of Pennsylvania. In re. Estate of Thomas Ward. Petitioner. Veronica Ward. Motion for emergency relief and temporary restraining order. I scanned the legalese: undue influence, mental incapacity, misappropriation of funds. She was suing me. She was not just contesting the will. She was accusing me of elder abuse. She was accusing me of stealing from our father. I looked up. People were whispering. I saw a woman I went to high school with leaning over to her friend, mouthing words. I threw a $20 bill on the table and ran out. I sat in my car in the parking lot, hyperventilating. Veronica had moved fast. She must have had this drafted before the funeral. She was prepared. She wanted a war. I could not fight this alone. I knew marketing. I knew how to sell shampoo. I did not know how to fight a legal battle against my own sister. I pulled out my phone and searched for Estate Attorney Briar Glenn. I skipped the first 3 names. They were all in the same Rotary Club as Graham. I needed someone outside the circle. I found a name. Samantha Rhodes. Her office was in the next town over. A 20-minute drive. The reviews said she was aggressive and expensive. I called her. "I can see you in an hour," her receptionist said. Samantha Rhodes's office was modern, sharp, and glass. It looked like a shark tank. Samantha herself was a woman in her 40s with hair cut in a sharp bob and glasses that looked like they could cut glass. She listened to me for 20 minutes without interrupting. She read the motion Veronica had filed. She looked at the trust summary I had brought. Then she took off her glasses and looked at me. "You need to understand something. Kylie," she said. Her voice was low and serious. "This is not about the law. Not yet. This is about psychology." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Your sister filed this motion publicly. She served you in a public place. She is loud in meetings. She is creating a narrative. She wants to be the victim, which means you have to be the villain. I am not the villain." I said. "It does not matter what you are," Samantha said. "It matters what she can make you look like. Her goal right now is to push you. She wants you to get angry. She wants you to send a nasty text message, or scream at her in the driveway, or hide assets. She wants you to make a mistake that looks like guilt." I felt a chill. That was exactly what Veronica did. She poked until you screamed, and then she pointed at you and said, "Look how crazy she is." "So what do?" I asked. "We fight," Samantha said. "But we fight quietly. We document everything, and we find out why she is so scared." "Scared?" "Yes," Samantha said. "People do not go scorched earth like this unless they are afraid of what will happen if they don't. She is trying to bury something, or she thinks you are about to find something." I thought about the note in my pocket. "Ask for the ledger." I hired her. It cost a $5,000 retainer, which I put on a credit card. I drove back to my father's house as the sun was setting. The shadows stretched long across the lawn. The house looked ominous now, guarding secrets I did not know how to read. I went inside and locked the door. I checked the deadbolt twice. I went back to the study. I turned on the desk lamp. I took the note out of my pocket and placed it next to the trust summary. "Ask for the ledger." Graham had been here. He had been here late at night. He had been here on Tuesdays. I looked at the trust summary again. The font looked standard. The bank logo looked real. But Marla had said Graham was here working on business. I picked up the landline phone on the desk. It still had a dial tone. I dialed Graham's office number. It was 6:30 in the evening. I expected voicemail. Graham answered on the second ring. "Graham Pell," he said. He sounded breathless. "Graham, it is Kylie." I said, "Oh, Kylie. You thought I was someone else?" I asked. No, I am just working late. What can I do for you?" I took a deep breath. I looked at the note. I want the ledger. Graham. Silence. What do you mean? He asked. His voice had gone very flat. I mean, I do not want the summary. I said, I want the actual transaction ledger. The raw data. I want to see every deposit and withdrawal for the last 5 years. And I want the original trust instrument, not the photocopy you gave me. There was a long pause. I could hear a clock ticking in the background on his end. Or maybe it was on my end. Kylie, he said, and his tone had changed. It was no longer the bumbling family friend. It was cold. That is a lot of paperwork. It will cost the estate a significant amount in fees to generate those reports. Veronica is already concerned about you wasting assets. I do not care about fees. I said, I want the ledger. He sighed. You are reading too much into things. Kylie, you are upset. You are grieving. You are standing there in his office, looking at old papers, and you are letting your imagination run away with you. My blood ran cold. I had not told him I was in the office. I had called from the landline, which had no caller ID on his end. I knew that because my father had a blocked number, and I had not told him I was looking at papers. I looked around the room. The curtains were open. The dark yard was outside. How do you know I am in the office? Graham? I asked. There was a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. I just assumed. He said, It is where the phone is. There's a phone in the kitchen. I said, And a phone in the bedroom. He did not answer. I looked down at the note on the desk. Ask for the ledger. Graham spoke again, and his voice was soft, almost intimate. Don't let Veronica get in your head. Kylie, it would be a shame if this got ugly. I checked my watch. It was 6:35. I looked at the window. I could see my own reflection in the glass, and behind it, the blackness of the yard. But I felt it. I felt eyes. He knew where I was. He knew what I was doing. I will see you in court. Graham, I said. I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking. I stood there in the pool of yellow light, surrounded by my father's books, and I realized that Samantha was right. This was not a legal battle. It was a trap, and I had just stepped into it. The legal system is not a sword. It is a waiting room. I learned this in the week following my father's funeral. I expected shouting, gavels, and dramatic revelations. Instead, I got email threads and the slow grinding friction of bureaucracy. Samantha Rhodes, my attorney, sent a formal demand letter to Graham Pell the morning after I hired her. It was a beautiful piece of writing, sharp and clear, requesting a full accounting of the trust, copies of all original instruments, and a complete transaction history for the last 5 years. It was the kind of letter that demanded respect. Graham's response, which arrived 4 days later, was a masterclass in professional condescension. He did not refuse. He simply sidestepped. He wrote that he was delighted to assist, but that compiling 5 years of raw data would be an unnecessary expense for the estate. He attached what he called a comprehensive summary, a 3-page document that looked suspiciously like the one he had already given me, just reformatted with a different font, in his cover letter. He added a paragraph that made my teeth ache. I am concerned, he wrote, that this sudden aggressive posture suggests a hostility that Thomas would have found distressing. I hope we can resolve this as a family, without draining the estate on billable hours for outside counsel. He was painting me as the aggressor. He was the weary, reasonable family friend trying to protect my father's legacy from his greedy, city-dwelling daughter. Samantha read the letter and tossed it onto her desk. Standard. She said, He is stalling. He wants you to look at the legal fees. Panic, and take a settlement. I am not panicking. I said, but I am also not rich. Samantha. I cannot pay you forever. Then we need to find something that forces his hand. She said, He is hiding behind the usual process. We need to find something unusual. I went back to the house on Elm Street. It had been 10 days since the funeral. The flowers were dead. The lasagna Marla Haynes gave me was gone. The silence in the house had settled into a fine dust that coated everything. If Graham would not give me the history, I had to build it myself. I turned the dining room table into an excavation site. My father was old school. He did not do online banking, but he kept receipts, He kept everything. I found shoeboxes in the closet, accordion files in the basement, and stacks of envelopes shoved into the pockets of his winter coats. I started building a timeline. January was mundane: grocery store, pharmacy, gas station, the water bill, the electric bill. February was the same, but in March, I found a check carbon. It was for $500. The payee was listed as North Hollow Consulting. I frowned. My father was a retired history teacher. He did not have a business. He did not need consultants. I kept digging. April, another check to North Hollow Consulting, this time for $350. May, $700. I went through the entire year. The payments were irregular in timing and amount, but they were consistent over the last 12 months. My father had written checks totaling nearly $8,000 to this entity. There were no invoices, no contracts, just the check carbons and a few calendar notations that simply said NH due. I sat back, rubbing my eyes. $8,000 was not a fortune to a millionaire, but to my father, who clipped coupons for orange juice. It was a massive sum. Was he being scammed? Was it a timeshare? A subscription he forgot to cancel? I took a picture of the check carbon and texted it to Samantha. Then I made myself a sandwich and checked my phone. I had avoided social media since the funeral, but curiosity is a poison. I opened the app. Veronica had been busy. She had not named me directly. She was too smart for that. But she had posted a long, emotional status update that had over 200 likes. It is heartbreaking when death reveals the true character of the people around you. She wrote, "Some people only come home when there is a check to cash. Dad deserved better than to be treated like an ATM by family members who abandoned him years ago. I am just thankful I was there when it mattered. Hashtag family betrayal. Hashtag truth will out underneath." The comments were a chorus of sympathy. "So sorry you have to deal with this. Ronnie, people are disgusting. Keep your head up. We all know who was really there for Tom." I felt a hot flush of shame crawl up my neck. These were people I went to high school with. Mrs. Gable, the librarian, Coach Miller. They were reading this and picturing me as a vulture circling a corpse. I wanted to reply. I wanted to type. I was not the one who screamed at him until he stopped letting you in the house. I wanted to post the photo of the note I found in the drawer. But I remembered Samantha's warning. She wants to push you into reactive mistakes. I closed the app. I would not give her the satisfaction. I went back to the paperwork. I needed to understand the money. I found a file labeled life insurance in the bottom of the filing cabinet. I knew about the main policy. It was split 50-50 between Veronica and me. But tucked behind the main policy was a smaller one, a rider for $10,000 that my father had taken out 5 years ago. I scanned the document. The beneficiary had been changed 6 months ago. Originally, it was the estate, but the change form designated the beneficiary as Veronica Ward, $10,000. It was not a huge amount in the grand scheme of things, but the timing was suspicious. It was right around the time the North Hollow payments started increasing. I looked closely at the change form. It required a witness signature. The witness signature was a scrawl. L. Vale, Leonard Vale, Veronica's attorney. I felt a cold prickle on my skin. Why was Veronica's attorney witnessing a beneficiary change for my father 6 months before he died? My father had his own lawyer, Graham Pell. And then I looked at my father's signature on the line above. It looked shaky. My father had a very distinct signature, a sharp, angular T and a sweeping W. This signature had the shape, but the pressure was uneven. The ink pooled in the curves, like the hand holding the pen had hesitated, or like someone else had been guiding the hand. I compared it to a check he had signed 3 years ago. The difference was subtle, but it was there. The check signature was confident. The insurance form's signature was weak, but it was not just the signature. As I laid out the bank statements, the check carbons, and the insurance policies, a larger, darker picture began to form. I had assumed, like everyone else, that my father had a comfortable nest egg. He lived simply, he had a pension, he had the house, but the numbers on the table told a different story. My father was broke. The savings account, which I thought held $50,000, had $4,000 in it. The investment account had been drained over the last 3 years, liquidated in chunks of $2,000 and $3,000. He wasn't hoarding wealth. He was hemorrhaging it. The trust wasn't a vault. It was a sieve. I sat there in the fading light, feeling the floor drop out from under me. Veronica was fighting for the inheritance. Graham was protecting the trust, but there was almost nothing left. Why? Where did the money go? The only recurring outflow I couldn't identify was North Hollow Consulting, but that was only $8,000. The accounts were missing nearly $60,000 over 3 years. I felt a surge of protectiveness I hadn't expected. My father had been drowning. He had been quietly, desperately drowning in debt or blackmail or something I couldn't see, and he hadn't told anyone. Ask for the ledger. The note made sense now. The summaries Graham sent were designed to hide the drain. They probably showed the starting balance and the ending balance, glossing over the frantic withdrawals in between. I called Samantha. We need a court order. I said, I do not care what it costs. Graham is hiding the fact that the money is gone. 2 days later, Samantha got the order. It was a limited discovery order. The probate judge, a man named Judge Halloway who played golf on Sundays, was reluctant to grant a full forensic audit, but he ordered Graham to produce the complete administrative file for the trust within 48 hours. When the documents arrived at Samantha's office, I drove over to see them. Samantha looked grim. She pointed to a box on her conference table. That is what he sent, she said. I opened the box. It was a mess. It wasn't an organized file. It was a jumble of loose papers, photocopies that were crooked and faded, and printouts that were cut off at the margins. I picked up a stack of bank statements. Page 1 was there. Page 2 was missing. Page 3 was there. I picked up the trust instrument. The page with the signature block was a blurry copy that looked like it had been faxed 3 times. I looked at Samantha. Is this a joke? He claims it is a scanning error, Samantha said, her voice tight with anger. He says his staff is overwhelmed and the original files are in deep storage, so they had to work with what was available in the office. He apologizes for the quality. It is weaponized incompetence, I said. He is daring us to complain so he can say we are being difficult. Exactly, Samantha said. But he made a mistake. What? He included the email correspondence between his office and the bank. Look at this. She handed me a sheet of paper. It was an email from a Dylan Kessler at Pell Associates to the bank manager. Subject: Transfer request. Body: Please authorize the transfer of $5,000 to the operational account as discussed. Mr. Pell has the physical ledger for verification. Samantha tapped the paper. The physical ledger. He told us everything was digital and the software was glitchy, but here is his own employee confirming there is a physical book. Who is Dylan Kessler? I asked. Junior associate, Samantha said. Probably the poor kid doing the actual work while Graham plays golf. I looked at the email address. dkessler@pellaw.com. I need coffee. I said, I did not go to get coffee. I went to the coffee shop across the street from Graham Pell's office. It was a small place called the Daily Grind. I sat at a high-top table near the window, watching the door of the law firm. I had looked up Dylan Kessler on LinkedIn. He was 25, a recent law school graduate, and looked like he barely shaved. I waited for 2 hours. At 12:30, a young man matching his photo walked out of the building. He looked tired. He was wearing a suit that was slightly too large for him, and he was carrying a sandwich in a plastic container. He did not go to a restaurant. He walked toward the park bench down the block. I grabbed my coffee and followed him. I sat on the other end of the bench. He glanced at me, then went back to unwrapping his sandwich. Dylan? I asked. He jumped. He looked at me, his eyes wide behind wire-rimmed glasses. Yes? I am Kylie Ward, I said. The color drained from his face. He looked toward the office building, then back to me. I cannot talk to you, he said. He started to pack up his sandwich. Mr. Pell said. I know what Mr. Pell said. I said softly, I am not here to depose you. Dylan, I just want to know if my father died broke. He stopped moving. He looked at his hands. I am not trying to get you in trouble. I continued. But Graham sent us a box of garbage. Missing pages. Blurry scans. He said it was a scanning error. Dylan let out a short, nervous laugh. It wasn't a scanning error. Then what was it? He looked around. The street was busy. No one was listening. Mr. Pell curates the files, Dylan said, his voice barely a whisper. Before anything goes out, he goes through it. He pulls things. He pulls pages? Dylan nodded. And he keeps a separate set of books, for the older trusts. The ones that have been around for a long time. He calls it the legacy system, but it is just a red leather ledger he keeps in his safe. Why? I asked. Dylan looked at me, and I saw genuine fear in his eyes, because the numbers in the computer do not match the numbers in the bank. He said, my stomach dropped. He stood up. I have to go back. Please do not tell him I spoke to you. One more thing. I said, North Hollow Consulting. Do you know what it is? He shook his head. I have never seen a file for a vendor by that name. But what? I saw a check request for it once. He said, Mr. Pell signed it himself. Usually, he makes me sign the routine expenses, but he signed that one, and he put it in the outgoing mail himself. Thank you, Dylan, I said. He walked away fast, almost running. I sat on the bench for a long time. Graham was cooking the books. That was the only explanation. The legacy system was a fraud. He was stealing from the trusts, or borrowing from one to pay another, and my father's account was caught in the middle. But why was my father paying North Hollow? And why was he in debt? I went back to my car. I checked my phone. There was an email from Samantha. Attached. Correspondence from Leonard Vale. I opened the attachment. It was a letter from Veronica's lawyer to Samantha. Dear Ms. Rhodes, it has come to our attention that your client, Ms. Kylie Ward, has been seen harassing employees of the estate in public. Furthermore, we are concerned about Ms. Ward's mental state. As you know, she has a history of estrangement from the family, and her sudden obsession with the estate's finances suggests a projection of her own financial instability. We are prepared to depose her regarding her employment history and personal debts to establish her motivation for these baseless attacks on the trustee. I gripping the steering wheel, harassing employees. Dylan must have looked spooked when he went back, or someone saw us. And the narrative was shifting. I wasn't just a leech anymore. I was unstable. I was desperate. They were going to put my life on trial. They would subpoena my bank records, my credit card bills, my landlord. They would find out I was barely making rent in Chicago. They would use that to prove I was just a greedy daughter looking for a payday. I took a deep breath. Document everything. I opened the Notes app on my phone. November 12th, 12:45 p.m. Spoke to Dylan Kessler. Confirmed existence of separate physical ledger kept in Pell's safe. Confirmed Pell personally handles North Hollow payments. I logged the call. I logged the time. If they wanted a war of paper, I would give them one. But first, I had to find North Hollow. I had the address from the check carbon. 1402 Industrial Park Drive. Suite B. It was in a town called Oak Haven, about 40 minutes south of Briar Glen. I started the car. The drive took me out of the rolling hills and into a grittier, flatter part of the county. Oak Haven was a town of warehouses and distribution centers. I found Industrial Park Drive. It was a wide road lined with metal buildings and chain-link fences. I found number 1402. It was a small strip mall sandwiched between a tire shop and a shuttered diner. The sign above the door said, "Ship it all more." It was a shipping store. I parked and walked inside. The bell above the door chimed. A teenager with headphones around his neck was sitting behind the counter. "Help you?" he asked. "I am looking for Suite B." I said. He pointed to a wall of brass mailboxes. "That's Suite B," he said. I stared at the wall. Hundreds of small, locked metal boxes. "Do you have a box for North Hollow Consulting?" I asked. "Can't tell you that." He said. "Privacy." I pulled out a $20 bill and put it on the counter. "I don't need to get into the box." I said, I just want to know if they pick up their mail. The kid looked at the money, then at me. He typed something into his computer. Box 404, he said. Yeah. Someone comes in once a month. What do they look like? I asked. Don't know, he said. Usually comes in on Saturdays when I'm not here. My boss says it's some guy in a suit. Drives a nice car. A guy in a suit? Graham Pell? Leonard Vale? Thank you, I said. I walked back to my car. North Hollow Consulting was a mailbox. It was a shell. My father had been sending checks to a metal box in a shipping store next to a tire shop, and Graham Pell signed the checks himself. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was laundering, or blackmail. I felt a cold knot of fear in my stomach. Not the anxiety of public speaking or confrontation, but a primal physical warning. I was not just fighting my sister for a few $1,000s. I was poking at a machine that had been running for a long time. A machine that involved lawyers, fake companies, and 2 sets of books. I got in the car and locked the doors. I drove back to Briar Glen in silence. Watching the rearview mirror, every car looked suspicious. Every silver sedan looked like Graham's. When I got back to my father's house, the sun was down, the streetlights were humming. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house felt hostile. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My hand was shaking so hard the water sloshed over the rim. My phone buzzed on the counter. I jumped. It was a voicemail notification. Unknown number. I stared at the screen. I had not heard the phone ring. I pressed play. The voice was digital, slightly distorted, but calm. It was a male voice, but I couldn't tell if it was Graham or Leonard or someone else. Stop digging, the voice said. You don't know what you're breaking. Go back to Chicago. Kylie, take the settlement. There was a pause, a breath, before you lose more than just the money. The line clicked dead. I stood in the center of my dead father's kitchen. The silence pressing in on my ears. It wasn't a threat of violence, exactly. It was a warning. You don't know what you're breaking. I looked at the window. I had forgotten to close the blinds. I reached out and snapped the light off, plunging the kitchen into darkness. I stood there, breathing in the smell of old dust and fear. And I knew one thing for certain. I was not going back to Chicago. Fear is a strange engine. For the first 24 hours after receiving the voicemail, I operated on a high-frequency vibration of panic. I checked the locks on my father's house 3 times an hour. I slept with the lights on. I flinched every time a car drove down Elm Street. But by the second day, the vibration had slowed into a low, steady hum of anger. They wanted me to stop digging. That meant there was something to find. I drove to Samantha Rhodes's office on a Tuesday morning, the sky the color of wet slate. I played the voicemail for her. She listened to it twice, her face unreadable behind her glasses. This is good, she said finally. I stared at her. Good? A digital voice threatening me is good? It means we are close. She said, people do not threaten you when you are wrong. Kylie, they ignore you. They threaten you when you are right. She picked up her phone. I am filing a motion to compel, she said. No more polite letters. We are going to ask the judge to force Graham to produce the original ledger, the unredacted files, and the metadata for the electronic records, and we are going to attach an affidavit regarding this voicemail. Graham is not going to like that. I said. Samantha smiled, a sharp, thin expression that did not reach her eyes. I am counting on it. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the days leading up to it, Graham's demeanor shifted. He stopped playing the role of the benevolent family friend. His emails to Samantha became short, clipped, and aggressive. He started copying me on correspondence regarding administrative costs, highlighting the hourly rates of his paralegals as if to say, "Look how much of your own money you are burning." He called me 2 days before the hearing. "Kylie," he said. His voice was tight, the smooth baritone replaced by a jagged edge of impatience. I am looking at this motion Samantha filed. I have to tell you, I am disappointed. Disappointed. I repeated. We are trying to settle an estate here, not run a criminal investigation. He said, these motions are frivolous. They are going to drain the trust assets. I have a duty to protect the beneficiaries. And right now, the biggest threat to your inheritance is your own lawyer. The threat to my inheritance is the fact that $60,000 is missing. Graham. I said. There was a silence on the line. It wasn't the silence of confusion. It was the silence of calculation. You are making a mistake, he said softly. I can only protect you so much. Kylie, if you drag this into open court, things are going to come out. Things about your father. Things about Veronica. You are going to embarrass this family in front of the whole town. I gripped the phone. I am not the one who should be embarrassed. I said. I hung up. My hand was shaking, but not from fear, from clarity. He was scared. I needed to clear my head. So I went back to the house on Elm Street. It was raining. A cold, miserable drizzle that turned the world gray. I saw Marla Haynes in her yard, wrestling with a recycling bin. I grabbed my coat and went out to help her. Here, let me get that, I said, grabbing the handle. Oh, thank you. Dear, Marla said, brushing wet hair out of her eyes. My hip is acting up again. We dragged the bin to the curb. Marla looked at me, her eyes sharp and observant. You look tired. Kylie, she said, I am tired. I admitted. This estate stuff, it is messy, Marla nodded. She wiped her hands on her apron. Come inside, she said. I made tea, and I have something to tell you. I followed her into her kitchen. It was warm and smelled of cinnamon and yeast. We sat at her small round table, and she poured tea into floral cups. I did not want to say anything before, Marla said, looking into her cup, because it is family business. But I saw Veronica's car here the other day, after you left. Veronica came here? I asked. Marla nodded. She sat in the driveway for 20 minutes, just staring at the house. She did not go in. She just sat there. That is strange, I said. Marla hesitated. Then she looked up at me. You know, your father stopped letting her in. She said. I froze. What? About 6 months ago. Marla said. Maybe 8? He told me he changed the locks. He said he could not take it anymore. Take what? The yelling. Marla said. Every time she came over, it ended in screaming. I could hear it through the walls sometimes. She would demand money, or she would start talking about how he owed her for taking care of him. He told me it made his chest hurt. He said, Marla, I love her, but I cannot have her in the house. It is killing me. I felt a heavy weight settle in my chest. Veronica had stood up in Graham's office and claimed she was the dutiful daughter, the one who was always there. She claimed I was the stranger, but my father had locked her out. Did Graham know? I asked. Marla frowned. I assume so. Graham was the one who called the locksmith. I set my cup down. Graham knew. Graham knew my father was afraid of Veronica, or at least exhausted by her, and yet Graham sat there and let Veronica paint herself as the saint. Why? Because Graham needed Veronica, or Veronica had something on Graham. The hearing was held in the county courthouse, a limestone building that smelled of damp wool and floor wax. I wore my black blazer again. It felt like armor. Veronica was there with her attorney, Leonard Vale. Leonard was a tall man with silver hair and a smile that looked like it had been bought from a catalog. Veronica looked impeccable in a navy suit, but her eyes were red-rimmed. When the judge entered, we all stood. Judge Holloway was an older man with bushy eyebrows and a permanent expression of mild annoyance. Ms. Rhodes, the judge said, you are asking for a lot of paper here. Your Honor, Samantha said. Standing tall, we have evidence of irregularities in the trust administration. We have requested standard accounting documents and received incomplete, redacted, and altered copies. We are simply asking for the original source material. Graham stood up. He looked calm, reasonable. Your Honor, he said, we have provided extensive summaries. Ms. Ward is on a fishing expedition. The estate is modest. Producing 5 years of physical ledgers and banking metadata is an undue burden. The judge looked at Graham. Mr. Pell, the judge said, in my experience, the best way to stop a fishing expedition is to show that the pond is empty, if you have nothing to hide. Produce the ledger. I saw Graham's jaw tighten. "We will need time." "Your Honor," Graham said, "the records are in deep storage. You have 7 days." The judge said. He banged the gavel. As we walked out of the courtroom, Veronica cut across the aisle and blocked my path. "You are enjoying this, aren't you?" she said. Her voice was low, trembling with rage. "I am not enjoying anything. Veronica," I said, "I just want to know where the money went." "It is not about the money for you," she spat. "It never is. You just want to prove that you are better than me. You always wanted to be the good one, the one who went to college, the one who got out, and now you want to come back and prove that I'm a mess." I looked at her. Her face was twisted, ugly with resentment. "I did not come back to prove anything about you," I said. "I came back to bury our father." "You are a liar," she said. "You want to rewrite history so you do not have to feel guilty for leaving him. You want to make me look bad so you can feel justified in abandoning us." She leaned in close. "But I was here. Kylie. I was the one who cleaned up his vomit. I was the one who listened to him cry. You can sue whoever you want, but you cannot buy that moral high ground." She turned and stormed away, her heels clicking loudly on the marble floor. I watched her go. "You always wanted to be the good one." She wasn't talking about money. She was talking about identity. She had built her entire sense of self around being the martyr, the one who stayed, the one who suffered. If I exposed the truth, that Dad had locked her out, that the money was gone, it would destroy that narrative. She would just be the daughter who failed, and she would burn everything down to prevent that. Back at Samantha's office, we debriefed. Samantha was energized. "We got the order," she said. "Now we wait. But while we wait, I found something." She pulled a document from a folder. It was a copy of the trust instrument, the legal document that created the trust years ago. "I finally got a clean copy from the county recorder." She said, "Graham didn't send this. I had to dig for it. Look at Article 7, Section 3. I read the legal text. Disbursements in excess of $500 require dual authorization, the signature of the trustee, and the written approval of the grantor. The grantor was my father." "So?" I asked. "So," Samantha said, pulling out the stack of check carbons I had found. "Look at the checks to North Hollow Consulting. Look at the checks for cash." I looked. They were signed by Graham Pell. Only Graham Pell. There is no second signature. Samantha said, "Maybe Dad signed a separate approval form?" I suggested. "That is what Graham claimed in his email this morning." Samantha said, "He said your father gave verbal approval for all discretionary spending, but the trust doesn't allow for verbal approval. It demands written approval, which means Graham broke the rules." I said, "It means every single check over $500 that doesn't have your father's signature on it is a breach of fiduciary duty." Samantha said, "He is personally liable for that money." This was technical, but it was explosive. It meant Graham wasn't just sloppy. He was operating outside the law. But why would he take that risk? Unless the alternative was worse. I went back to the house. I needed to find evidence of these approvals. If my father had approved these payments, he would have written it down. He wrote everything down. I went into the study and pulled out his daily planners. He kept one for every year. I found the one for the current year and the previous year. I started flipping through the pages. Doctor appointment, 10 a.m. Change furnace filter. Call Kylie. My heart squeezed when I saw my name. I kept looking. I was looking for meetings with Graham. I found them. Meeting with GP. They happened once a month, usually on a Tuesday, but then I noticed something else. Starting about 18 months ago, the entries changed. Meeting with GP and LVLV, Leonard Vale. Veronica's lawyer, I flipped forward. Lunch with GP and LV, call with LV. My father was meeting with his trustee and his daughter's future lawyer together, regularly, long before he died, long before Veronica sued me. Why would my father be meeting with Veronica's lawyer? Unless Leonard Vale wasn't just Veronica's lawyer, unless he was involved in whatever mess my father was in. I took photos of the planner pages. The timeline was shifting. This wasn't a sudden dispute that happened after the funeral. This was a slow-motion car crash that had been happening for nearly 2 years. I needed to know about the money. The checks to North Hollow were one thing, but the cash withdrawals were another. I thought about the bank. I couldn't walk in and demand answers. Graham had the accounts locked down. But I knew people in this town. I remembered Susie Miller. We had been in Girl Scouts together. She worked at the First National Bank on Main Street. I had seen her at the grocery store a few days ago. I sent her a text. "Hey, Susie. Long time. Are you free for a drink tonight?" We met at a dive bar on the edge of town. It was loud, dark, and perfect for a conversation that shouldn't happen. Susie looked nervous. She knew about the lawsuit. Everyone in town knew about the lawsuit. "I cannot tell you anything specific. Kylie," she said after her second margarita, "I could lose my job." "I know," I said. "I am not asking for balances. My dad was meticulous. Susie, and the numbers don't make sense." Was he acting strange? Susie traced the rim of her glass. "He was stressed," she said quietly. "He used to come in every Friday and take out $200, like clockwork, for groceries, gas, whatever. He was sweet. He always brought me a peppermint." She paused. "But about a year ago, it changed. He stopped coming inside. He started using the drive-thru, and he started taking out larger amounts. Maximum withdrawals. 500, sometimes more." "Did he say why?" "No. But he looked scared, and he wasn't alone. Who was with him?" "Usually Graham Pell." She said, "But a few times? It was your sister." "Veronica?" Susie nodded. She would be in the passenger seat. She wouldn't look at the teller window. She would just stare straight ahead. I felt a chill. Veronica and Graham, both of them escorting my father to the bank to drain his accounts. And then, right before he died, Susie said, dropping her voice to a whisper, "There was a transfer, a big one." "How big?" $20,000. She said, "It cleared out his money market account." "Where did it go?" "I cannot see the destination account," Susie said. "It was a wire transfer. But I remember the reference line because it was weird." "What did it say?" "It just said settlement. Settlement. My father wasn't being scammed. He was paying someone off." I thanked Susie and left a $50 bill on the table. I drove home, my mind racing. Settlement. G, P, and LV, North Hollow. It was all connected. My father was paying a settlement to someone, and Graham and Leonard were orchestrating it. I went back to the study. I had missed something. If there was a settlement, there had to be an agreement. I pulled out the file cabinet drawers again. I looked through everything, medical records, house deed, and then I found a folder I had skipped because it looked so innocuous. It was labeled Health. Inside were old prescription receipts, but stuck to the back of a receipt for blood pressure medication was a folded piece of paper. It was an invoice. From Mediation Services of Central Pennsylvania. To Thomas Ward. Services rendered. Family mediation session regarding T. Ward, V. Ward, and K. Ward. Absent. Date: 2 years ago, my father had hired a mediator. For family mediation, I stared at the paper. K. Ward. Absent. They had held a mediation session without me. Why? I turned the page over. There were handwritten notes on the back in my father's script. Agreed to terms. She promises to stop. Lump sum payment of $15,000. Monthly support via trust. She promises to stop. Stop what? Stop screaming? Stop threatening? The timeline clicked. 2 years ago. Something happened. Veronica did something, or threatened something. My father hired a mediator. Graham and Leonard got involved. They reached a settlement. My father paid $15,000 up front and agreed to monthly payments. That was why the money was gone. Veronica wasn't suing because she was cut out of the will. She was suing because the payments stopped when he died. She was treating the inheritance like a severance package she was owed. The next morning, the notification popped up on my phone. New filing. Ward versus Ward. Veronica had filed an amended petition. I opened it. My stomach turned. She was claiming that I had manipulated our father into cutting her off as punishment, and she had attached evidence. Exhibit A, Text messages from Kylie Ward to Thomas Ward. I read the texts. Kylie: you have to stop giving her money. Dad: it is enabling her. Kylie: she needs to learn to stand on her own. Kylie: just cut her off. It is the only way. They were real texts. I had sent them 3 years ago, when Veronica had lost her job and was asking him for rent money again. But in the filing, they were presented without dates. They looked like I had sent them the week he died. They made me look cold, calculating, and cruel. They made me look like the reason he had stopped helping her. I felt a wave of nausea. She was twisting my concern for him into a weapon against me. I called Samantha. She is lying about the context. I said, my voice shaking, we know that. Samantha said, but the judge doesn't. We need to authenticate those texts with the correct dates. But Kylie, this is getting ugly. She is not just coming for the money. She is coming for your character. Let her come, I said. I found something. I told her about the mediator invoice. Get me that document. Samantha said, if there was a prior settlement, it might bar her from suing now. If she signed a waiver back then, this whole lawsuit is fraud. I scanned the invoice and sent it. Then I did something risky. I called Graham. I am coming to your office, I said. He did not argue. When I walked in, the receptionist did not look up. I walked straight to his door and opened it. Graham was packing a briefcase. He looked up, startled. Kylie, he said, you cannot just barge in here. I slammed the mediator invoice on his desk. What is this, Graham? I asked. He looked at the paper. His face went completely blank. It is an invoice, he said. It is proof that you and Leonard and my father had a deal. I said, a deal to pay Veronica to leave him alone. A deal that you hid from me. He sighed. He sat down heavily in his chair. It was not a deal to leave him alone. Kylie, it was support. Veronica was going through a hard time. Your father wanted to help her, but he wanted structure. He wanted to make sure the money was used for rent and bills, not other things. So you set up North Hollow Consulting to funnel the money? I asked. He flinched. North Hollow is a legitimate vendor. He said automatically. Stop it, I shouted. I was surprising myself with the volume of my voice. Stop lying to me. I know about the mailbox. I know about the separate ledger. I know you and Leonard have been managing this settlement for years. He looked at me for a long time. Then he leaned forward, clasping his hands. Kylie, he said, his voice low and reasonable. Your father loved you both, but he knew Veronica was fragile. He knew she couldn't handle money. He set this up to protect her, and to protect himself. Protect himself from what? From the stress. Graham said, from the fighting. He opened a drawer and pulled out a file. I can make this go away, he said. What? The lawsuit? The smears? The public humiliation? I can make it stop. How? We settle, he said. We give Veronica a lump sum from the remaining assets. Say, $40,000. You take the rest, which will be modest, but it will be over. You can go back to Chicago. You can stop looking at old checks. You can move on. He pushed a piece of paper toward me. It was a draft settlement agreement. Just sign this, he said, and we spare everyone the embarrassment. I looked at the word embarrassment. He wasn't trying to save me from embarrassment. He was trying to save himself. If I kept digging, I would find the waiver. I would find the proof that Veronica had already been paid off. I would find the proof that he had breached his duty by paying her under the table through a fake company. He was buying my silence with my own inheritance. I stood up. No. I said, Kylie, no, Graham, I want the ledger. I walked out. I drove back to Samantha's office. I was vibrating with adrenaline. When I walked in, Samantha was standing by her assistant's desk, holding a large manila envelope. This just came for you, she said. It was slid under the door. There was no return address. Just Kylie Ward written in block letters. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was a photocopy. It was a page from a ledger, a handwritten ledger. Date, August 14th, 2021. Payee, V. Ward. Amount, $15,000. Memo, reimbursement/settlement, and underneath that, in a different pen, a note written in the margin, "Keep quiet. Do not log in system." I stared at the page. This was it. This was the proof. Veronica had been paid, and Graham had ordered it to be hidden. "Who sent this?" Samantha asked. I looked at the handwriting, the block letters on the envelope. I thought about Dylan Kessler, eating his sandwich on the bench. Terrified. "I think I have a friend on the inside." I said. Samantha took the paper. She smiled. And this time, it was a genuine, predatory smile. "This changes everything," she said. I looked out the window at the gray sky of Briar Glen. The fear was gone. The confusion was gone. Now, I was just ready to burn it down. That night, the house on Elm Street felt less like a home and more like the ribcage of a dead animal. I sat at the kitchen table with the photocopy of the ledger page in front of me. The single lamp cast a yellow circle on the paper, illuminating the handwritten words that changed everything: reimbursement/settlement, and keep quiet. I had spent the last 3 hours spiraling. I paced the living room floor until the rug burned my feet. I imagined screaming at Graham Pell until his composure cracked. I imagined driving to Veronica's house and taping the paper to her front door. I poured a glass of wine, stared at it, and poured it down the sink. I did not want to be numb. I wanted to be sharp. The anger was a physical thing, a hot stone in my throat. But beneath the anger was a terrifying grief. My father had been managing a secret war between his daughters, and I had been too busy in Chicago to notice. I needed to stop feeling and start thinking. I grabbed a notebook from my bag. It was a spiral-bound pad I used for work ideas, mostly marketing slogans for shampoos and meal kits. I turned to a fresh page and uncapped a black pen. What I know, I wrote it down. 1. Dad paid Veronica $15,000 2 years ago. 2. Graham Pell and Leonard Vail orchestrated it. 3. Graham is keeping 2 sets of books, the digital summary he shows the court, and the physical ledger he keeps in a safe. 4. North Hollow. Consulting is a shell used to route payments. What I assume. 1. The $15,000 was part of a larger agreement to make Veronica stop harassing Dad. 2. Veronica signed something promising to walk away. 3. The money ran out or stopped when Dad died. And now she is suing to get back on the payroll. What I can prove. 1. Nothing legally admissible yet. The photocopy is anonymous. The North Hollow connection is circumstantial. I stared at the list. The gap between what I knew and what I could prove was a canyon. If I walked into court with an anonymous photocopy, Graham would claim it was a forgery. He would claim I typed it up myself. I needed the original. I closed the notebook. The panic receded, replaced by a cold, mechanical determination. I was not a lawyer, and I was not a detective. But I was the daughter who cleaned up messes, and this was the biggest mess Thomas Ward had ever left. The next morning, Samantha Rhodes went on the offensive. She filed subpoenas for the records of the Briar Glen Community Foundation and for the full banking history of North Hollow Consulting. She also filed a demand for the production of the original physical ledger, citing the anonymous tip as cause for reasonable suspicion of fraud. Graham's reaction was immediate and vicious. He filed a motion to quash the subpoenas. In his filing, he didn't just argue about relevance, he attacked my character. The petitioner, Ms. Kylie Ward, is engaged in a campaign of harassment against the trustee. His brief read, unable to accept the modest nature of her father's estate, she has concocted a conspiracy theory involving respected local professionals and charitable organizations. These subpoenas are a fishing expedition designed to intimidate and increase legal fees, draining the very assets she claims to protect. I read the brief in Samantha's office. My hands were shaking. He is calling me a harasser. I said, he is gaslighting me on public record. It is a standard tactic, Samantha said, though she looked annoyed. He is trying to make the judge see you as the hysterical daughter. He wants Judge Holloway to think, oh, here we go. Another family feud where the kids can't accept that Daddy spent the money, but we know he didn't spend it. I said, "We know he hid it." Samantha tapped the desk. "We have to prove the mechanism." She said, "You found the mailbox for North Hollow. But Graham claims North Hollow is a legitimate vendor. We need to trace the money." I spent the next 2 days following the money. Not through banks, but through the community. The checks to North Hollow had been endorsed. I had seen the backs of the canceled checks in the jumbled box Graham sent. They were stamped for deposit only. BGCF, account 884. BGCF, Briar Glen Community Foundation. I made an appointment with the director of the foundation, a woman named Carol Evans. The foundation was housed in a small office next to the library. Carol was a kind woman with silver hair and a desk cluttered with photos of grandchildren. I did not go as a litigant. I went as a daughter. I am looking into my father's charitable giving. I told her, Thomas Ward. He passed away recently. "Oh, Thomas," she said, her face softening. "He was such a lovely man. He didn't have much, but he always gave to the annual fund. I am trying to track down some specific donations." I said, "I found checks written to North Hollow Consulting that were deposited into a BGCF account 884. Carol frowned. She turned to her computer. "That doesn't sound right," she said. "North Hollow isn't a charity." She typed for a moment, adjusting her glasses. "Ah," she said, "here it is. Account 884. That isn't a general donation fund. Kylie, that is a donor-advised fund. What does that mean?" "It is a pass-through," she explained. "A donor sets up the fund, puts money into it, and then directs us to distribute it to specific causes. It provides a layer of anonymity. The checks come from the foundation, not the individual." "Who is the advisor on the fund?" I asked. She clicked a mouse. "Graham Pell," she said. "He manages it for a client." "And who is the recipient?" She hesitated. "I cannot give you the full details without a subpoena, but, please, Carol," I said, "my father's estate is in chaos. I just need to know if he was donating to a charity or paying a bill." She looked at me, then back at the screen. "It is not a charity," she said quietly. "The disbursements from that fund go to a private LLC for consulting services. But looking at the notes here, it says Family Support Administration." "Family support. Thank you, Carol," I said. I walked out into the cold sunshine. Graham had set up a donor-advised fund. My father wrote checks to North Hollow, which was just a name Graham made up. Graham deposited them into the foundation, and then the foundation cut checks to Veronica or her creditors. It was money laundering. Clean. Suburban. Nonprofit money laundering. It made the payments look like charitable giving or business expenses, hiding the fact that my father was hemorrhaging cash to his own daughter. I needed to see the house again. I needed to feel close to him. When I pulled into the driveway, Marla Haynes was on her porch, sweeping away dead leaves. She waved, and I walked over. "I feel like I'm uncovering a stranger." I told her, leaning against the railing. He had all these secrets. Marla, accounts within accounts. Marla stopped sweeping. She looked out at the street. He wasn't a stranger. "Kylie," she said, "he was just a father who was tired." She propped the broom against the wall. "About a month before he died. We were sitting right here," she said. "He was having a bad day. Veronica had called him 3 times before noon. He looked at me and said, 'I am trying to leave them something that won't turn them into enemies.' The words hit me like a physical blow. 'He failed,' I whispered. 'No,' Marla said firmly. 'He didn't fail. He ran out of time. He thought if he could just get everything settled, if he could just pay off whatever debts he felt he owed, you two could start fresh. He wanted to leave you a clean slate.' I felt tears prick my eyes. 'He left us a war.' Marla, he left you the truth," she said. "You just have to be brave enough to look at it." I went inside my father's house and sat in the silence. Something that won't turn them into enemies. He knew. He knew that if he left money on the table, Veronica would fight for it. So he tried to distribute it while he was alive. He tried to buy peace. But peace cannot be bought. It can only be made. The next day was the hearing on the motion to quash. I met Samantha at the courthouse. She looked energized. I found something, she said as we walked up the steps. What? I went back through the mediator's files. The invoice you found referenced a mediated agreement. I called the mediation center. They couldn't give me the content, but they confirmed a file exists, and they confirmed that a memorandum of understanding was signed by all parties. Did Graham produce it? He produced a draft. Samantha said, but here's the kicker. The draft references an Exhibit B, waiver of future claims. Let me guess. I said, Exhibit B is missing. Gone. Samantha said, the copy Graham sent ends at Exhibit A. I stopped walking. That is why she is suing. I said, Samantha nodded, if that waiver exists, and if it says what I think it says. Veronica already traded her inheritance for that $15,000 in the monthly payments. She signed away her right to sue. She is not fighting to get money. Kylie? She is fighting to suppress the document that says she already took it. We entered the courtroom. The air was thick with tension. Graham was there, looking polished and bored. Veronica sat beside him, staring straight ahead. The hearing was technical. Graham's lawyer argued that my subpoenas were broad and invasive. Samantha argued that the trustee had failed to provide basic transparency. Judge Holloway listened, rubbing his temples. Mr. Pell, the judge said finally, the petitioner has raised significant questions about the flow of funds. The existence of a secondary ledger, if true, is a serious matter. It is not a secondary ledger. Your Honor, Graham said smoothly, it is an archival retention system for pre-digital records. It contains sensitive information about other clients. Allowing Ms. Ward access to it would violate their privacy, then redact the other clients. The judge snapped. Veronica shifted in her seat. I watched her. She was wearing a high-necked blouse and pearls, the picture of a grieving daughter, but her hand was gripping the table so hard her knuckles were white. The judge continued, I am not going to quash the subpoenas, but I am going to narrow them. I want the records regarding the Ward estate only. And Mr. Pell, I want you to produce that ledger. Graham opened his mouth to argue. I want it delivered to my chambers for an in-camera review. The judge said, I will look at it myself. If I see fraud, I will release it to the petitioner. If it is just harmless archival notes, I will keep it sealed. Does that satisfy your privacy concerns? Graham paused. He looked trapped. Yes, Your Honor, he said tightly. We are adjourned. I walked out of the courtroom feeling a surge of triumph. The judge was going to see the ledger. He was going to see the keep quiet note. I followed Veronica and Leonard out to the parking lot. I wasn't trying to confront them. My car was just parked in the same row. Veronica was walking fast, her heels clicking aggressively on the pavement. Leonard was trying to keep up. Veronica. Wait, Leonard said. She spun around. You said he wouldn't look at it, she screamed. Her voice echoed off the concrete. It wasn't the voice of a grieving daughter. It was the voice of a cornered animal. Keep your voice down, Leonard hissed, looking around. You told me Graham had handled it, she shouted, ignoring him. You said the paper trail was buried. If the judge sees that book... Leonard, I am done. Do you understand? I am done. She slammed her purse onto the hood of her car. I stood by the pillar, frozen. She wasn't talking about losing the money. She was talking about being done, ruined, exposed. She looked up and saw me. Her face went slack. For a second, the mask dropped completely. I didn't see hatred. I saw terror. She looked small, old, and terrified. Then the mask slammed back into place. What are you looking at? She snarled. I unlocked my car. I am looking at someone who is afraid of a book. Veronica, I said. She got into her car and slammed the door. Leonard stood there for a moment, adjusting his tie, looking at me with cold, flat eyes. Then he got in the passenger side, and they sped away. That afternoon, I went to the grocery store. I needed milk, but mostly I needed to be around normal people doing normal things. I was standing in the dairy aisle, staring at the yogurt, when a hand brushed my arm. I flinched. It was Dylan Kessler. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing a hoodie and jeans. He looked like a college student, not a lawyer. "Don't look at me," he whispered, grabbing a carton of milk. I stared straight ahead at the yogurt. "Dylan," I said, "he is not going to produce it." Dylan said. His voice was barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator case. "What?" "The ledger," Dylan said. "The judge ordered him to bring it tomorrow. He won't do it. What will he do?" "He has it stored at the off-site facility on Route 9, Dylan said. "Unit 404. It is listed under North Hollow Consulting. He moved it there yesterday. He is going to claim it is lost or destroyed." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Dylan paused. I saw his reflection in the glass door. He looked sick, because my name is on the emails. He said, "When this blows up, I don't want to go to jail for him." He walked away. I stood there, clutching the handle of the shopping basket. "Unit 404, I called Samantha. He is going to destroy it." I said, "We have a court order." Samantha said, "If he destroys it, he goes to prison. Only if we can prove he destroyed it." I said, "He moved it." Samantha, "It is at a storage unit on Route 9. We can't break into a storage unit." "Kylie, we don't have to." I said, "We just have to let the judge know where it is so he can send the sheriff to get it." Samantha was silent for a moment. "I will draft an emergency motion to impound," she said. "I will get it to the judge first thing in the morning." I went home and waited. The night felt endless. I sat in the living room, watching the streetlights flicker. My father had tried to leave us something that wouldn't turn us into enemies, but he had underestimated the desperation of people who build their lives on lies. Veronica couldn't afford to be exposed. Graham couldn't afford to be disbarred. They were dangerous because they had everything to lose. At 11 p.m., my phone rang. It was Samantha. Her voice was grim. "It is too late." She said, "What happened?" "I just got an email from Graham's office." She said, "He is notifying the court and all parties." "Notifying us of what?" "There was a break-in." She said. My stomach dropped. "Where?" "At his office," she said. "And at the off-site storage facility. He claims that vandals broke into the archives. He says several boxes of legacy records were stolen or damaged." I felt a laugh bubble up in my throat, hysterical and sharp. "Of course," I said. "The night before the judge is supposed to see the ledger. Vandals just happened to steal it. He is going to file a police report." Samantha said, "He is going to play the victim. He will say he cannot comply with the court order because the evidence was stolen. He is erasing history." I said, "He is trying." Samantha said, "But he made a mistake." "What mistake?" "He thinks the ledger is the only proof." She said, "He forgot about the waiver." "But the waiver is missing." I said, "It is missing from his file." Samantha said, "But Leonard Vale was the opposing counsel on that agreement." "So?" "So," Samantha said, her voice turning cold. "Leonard Vale has a copy, and Leonard Vale is not the trustee. He doesn't have the same protections." "We are going to subpoena Leonard?" "No," Samantha said. "We are going to destroy him." I hung up the phone. I walked to the window. The street was empty. Graham thought he had won. He thought burning the ledger would save him, but he had just proven that there was something worth burning. I looked at the reflection of my own face in the glass. I didn't look like the Kylie who had arrived in town 2 weeks ago. That Kylie was soft. That Kylie wanted to be practical. This Kylie wanted justice. I checked my watch. It was midnight. The game had changed. They weren't fighting a probate case anymore. They were covering up a crime. And I was going to make sure that when the truth came out, it didn't just whisper, it would scream. The morning sun hit the broken glass of the office door, making the shards glitter like diamonds on the cheap commercial carpet. I stood behind the yellow police tape, watching 2 officers from the Briar Glen Police Department wander through the reception area of Graham Pell's law firm. They moved with the casual, heavy-footed slowness of men who had already decided what the report would say before they even uncapped their pens. It was a performance. I knew it. Samantha knew it. And looking at the tight, practiced line of Graham Pell's mouth as he spoke to the sergeant, I knew he knew it too. It looks like a smash and grab, the sergeant said. Loud enough for me to hear. Probably kids looking for petty cash or electronics. We have had a string of these in the industrial park. Graham nodded solemnly, looking the part of the violated pillar of the community. They made a mess of the archives, Graham said, gesturing to a hallway where file boxes had been overturned. It is tragic. Decades of client history. Just compromised. We are still doing an inventory to see exactly what is missing. I stepped forward, the tape pressed against my stomach. Did they take the safe? I asked. The sergeant turned to look at me. His eyes were flat and uncurious. He was a man I recognized from high school, a year ahead of me, the kind of guy who peaked at 17 and had been protecting his turf ever since. Who are you? He asked. I am Kylie Ward. I said, I have a court order for a specific ledger that was stored in this building, or at the offsite unit. Was that hit too? The sergeant looked at Graham. Graham offered a small, sad shrug. Ms. Ward is a beneficiary of an estate I manage. Graham said, she is very upset. And yes, unfortunately, the perpetrators seem to have hit both locations. It was a targeted spree. Targeted, I repeated. You just said it was kids looking for petty cash. Now it is a targeted spree that hit 2 specific locations 10 miles apart in the same night? The sergeant stepped closer to the tape. Look, miss, he said, his voice dropping an octave into that tone men use when they want a woman to feel small. We are looking into it. Detective Miller will file a report. But if you are not an employee or the property owner, I am going to have to ask you to step back. You are contaminating the scene. I looked at the scene. There was glass on the floor. Yes, but the computers were still on the desks. The expensive espresso machine was still on the counter. The only things that had been disturbed were the paper files. It was not a burglary. It was a bonfire without the flames. I walked back to my car, my blood boiling so hot I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. I called Samantha. They are helping him. I said, the police are writing it up as vandalism. He is going to claim the ledger is gone. Samantha did not sound panicked. She sounded like a surgeon who had just found a tumor she expected to find. Let him claim it, she said. He just handed us a weapon. What weapon? I asked. The evidence is gone. He destroyed the paper. Kylie, Samantha said, but he forgot that he runs a modern business. I am filing for an emergency preservation order. Not for the physical files. Those are ashes now. I am filing for the metadata, the server backups, the cloud logs, and I am going to argue that the destruction of evidence, spoliation, allows the court to assume the missing evidence contained proof of fraud. She paused. And Kylie? The judge is furious. Why? Because judges hate being played. She said, Holloway issued the order for the ledger yesterday. For it to vanish 12 hours later? That is an insult to his bench. He just granted me emergency powers. I can freeze everything, the foundation, the personal accounts, the firm's operating accounts, everything. I felt a grim satisfaction. Graham had overplayed his hand. He thought he was untouchable in this town because he shook the right hands. He forgot that the law, when wielded by someone who wasn't afraid of him, was a blunt instrument. By noon, the preservation orders had been served. The effect was instantaneous. It was as if a dam had broken. For weeks, I had been shouting into the void, ignored by bankers, dismissed by receptionists, and stonewalled by trustees. But once the court order hit the fax machines of Briar Glen, the silence ended. My phone started ringing. The first call was from the bank manager who had previously refused to speak to me. Ms. Ward, he said, his voice trembling slightly. We just received the order. We want to assure you that we are fully cooperating. We have locked down the accounts. We are generating the full transaction history you requested. We had no idea there were irregularities. He was terrified. He was realizing that he had been helping Graham Pell launder money, and he was scrambling to get on the right side of history. The second call was from Carol Evans at the Community Foundation. She was crying. Kylie, she sobbed. I had no idea. I thought, Graham told me it was a standard family support structure. He said your father wanted to keep it private to protect Veronica's dignity. I believe you. Carol, I said, we are sending the file over to your lawyer right now. She said, every check request, every email, Kylie, the memos, they aren't for charitable giving, they are for legal fees. And settlements. Settlements? Yes, she said. There are payments to a firm in Harrisburg, and payments to an individual named V. Ward. Thank you. Carol. I said. I hung up. I sat in my car in the driveway of my father's house. The picture was sharpening. The money wasn't just being given to Veronica for rent. It was being used to pay legal fees. What had she done? I looked at the house. It stood silent and gray against the winter sky. My father had lived here alone, carrying a burden that was eating him alive. He had paid for silence. He had paid to keep his daughter out of trouble, or out of jail, or out of the public eye. And now, that silence was breaking. My phone buzzed again. It was Veronica. I stared at the screen. She hadn't called me since the day of the funeral. I answered. Hello? Veronica? Kylie. She said. Her voice was soft, stripped of the screeching rage I had seen in the parking lot. It sounded like the sister I remembered from 20 years ago, before everything went wrong. What do you want? I asked. I want to stop this. She said. I am tired. Kylie, Graham is making a mess. I don't want to fight in court anymore. I waited. I didn't trust the softness. Can you come over? She asked. To the house? Just us. No lawyers. No Graham. Just two sisters talking about their dad. It was the invitation I would have killed for 2 weeks ago. But now, it felt sharp. Why? I asked. Because I want to explain, she said. And maybe we can work something out. Please, I will be there in 20 minutes. I said. I hung up. I didn't go unarmed. I opened my bag and took out the photocopy of the ledger page, the one with keep quiet written in the margin. I folded it and put it in my pocket. When I pulled up to the house, Veronica's car was already there. She was waiting on the porch swing, wrapped in a thick wool coat. She looked small. She stood up when I walked up the steps. She didn't hug me. She just opened the door and walked into the kitchen. The house was cold. I had turned the thermostat down to save money, and the air held a chill that seeped into the bones. Veronica sat at the kitchen table. Her phone was lying face down on the placemat in front of her. It was positioned perfectly between us, the microphone end pointing toward my chair. I saw it immediately. She was recording. I sat down. I kept my coat on. So, I said, you wanted to talk. She sighed. A long, shuddering breath. She ran her hands through her hair. I know you think I'm a monster. Kylie, she said, I know you think I am greedy. But you were not here. You did not see him at the end. I am here now. I said. She looked at me, her eyes wet. He was difficult. She said, he was confused. He promised me things. Kylie, he told me he wanted me to have the money because he knew I needed it more. You have your career. You have Chicago. I have nothing. I looked at the phone. Is that why he locked you out? I asked clearly. Her eyes flickered. He didn't lock me out, she said quickly. That is just gossip. Marla talks too much. Marla doesn't lie. I said, and neither do the bank records. Veronica leaned forward. The bank records are complicated, she said. Dad owed me that money. Kylie? Owed you? I asked. For what? For my life, she burst out. The volume of her voice spiked. Then she caught herself and lowered it again, glancing at the phone. I gave up everything to stay in this town. I gave up my career. I gave up my marriage. I stayed here to be near him, and he knew that. He knew he owed me. I looked at her. I saw the narrative she had built, brick by brick, to protect herself from the truth. She truly believed she was a victim. She believed that her failures were sacrifices. But then I reached into my pocket. He didn't owe you, Veronica. I said, he was paying you off. I pulled out the photocopy and slid it across the table. She looked down. I watched her face. I saw the blood drain out of it. I saw her eyes widen, then narrow. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "It doesn't matter," I said. "What matters is the date. August 14th, 2 years ago, $15,000, reimbursement/settlement." She stared at the paper and the note. I continued, "Keep quiet." She didn't speak. "You signed a waiver, didn't you?" I asked. 2 years ago, you agreed to take a payout and walk away. You agreed to stop harassing him." She snatched the paper and crumpled it in her fist. "This is fake," she hissed. "It is not fake," I said. "And neither is the copy that Leonard Vale has in his files." She froze. "Leonard?" "He was the opposing counsel on the mediation." "Veronica." I said, "He knows. He knows you signed the waiver, and he is representing you in a lawsuit that claims you were disinherited unfairly. That is fraud, for both of you." She stood up. Knocking her chair back, it clattered against the floor. "You don't know what you are talking about," she shouted. "The recording forgotten, the performance abandoned. It wasn't a settlement. It was help. I was in trouble, okay? I was in trouble, and he helped me." "What kind of trouble?" I asked. She looked at me, her chest heaving. I hit someone," she said. The room went deadly silent. "What?" I whispered. "It was an accident," she said, her voice shaking. "I was driving. It was raining. I didn't see him. It wasn't bad. Kylie, he didn't die, but he was hurt, and I had been drinking, just a little, but enough." I stared at her. "Dad paid him off," she said. "He paid the guy to not file a police report. He paid for the medical bills. He paid for the lawyer to scrub the record. That is where the money went." I felt sick. "The $15,000 wasn't for you." I said, "No." She said, "It was for the settlement. But then the guy came back. He wanted more, and Dad paid him again. And then I needed money because I lost my license and couldn't work. So Dad set up the trust payments." She looked at me, pleading. "He did it to save me. Kylie, he did it so I wouldn't go to jail. If you expose this, if you drag this into court, they will reopen the case. I will go to prison." I looked at the crumpled paper in her hand. "So you sued me." I said slowly, "You sued me for the inheritance, knowing that the money was gone because he spent it saving you from prison. I needed to live." She wept. "The payment stopped when he died. I didn't know what else to do. Graham told me we could just challenge the will and get the house. He said nobody would look that deep." "Graham knew?" "Of course Graham knew," she screamed. "Graham set it up. Graham was the one who drove the cash to the guy's house." I stood up. I picked up her phone from the table. I stopped the recording. "You are right. Veronica," I said. "I didn't know what I was breaking." I put the phone back down. "But you broke it a long time ago." I walked out of the house. I heard her sobbing behind me. A raw, terrified sound. But I didn't turn back. I drove straight to Samantha's office. I told her everything. She sat in her chair, staring out the window at the darkening sky. "This changes the strategy," she said. "How?" I asked. "We aren't just fighting for the estate anymore," she said. "We are holding a grenade. If we use this testimony, Veronica goes to jail. Graham gets disbarred and probably indicted for obstruction of justice and compounding a felony. Leonard Vale gets pulled down for ethics violations." She looked at me. "Your father spent the last 2 years of his life trying to bury this. Kylie, if we win, we dig it up." I thought about Marla's words. I am trying to leave them something that won't turn them into enemies. He had tried to save Veronica. He had emptied his life savings to keep her out of a cell. And in return, she had called him weak and tried to destroy his reputation to get the last scraps of his estate. He didn't do it to save the family. I said, he did it to save her, and she didn't care. "So what do you want to do?" Samantha asked. "I want to finish it," I said. The final hearing was scheduled for 3 days later. The atmosphere in Briar Glen had shifted. The town was small, and whispers moved faster than fiber optics. People knew something was happening. They knew the police had been to Graham's office. They knew the banks were frozen. I walked down Main Street to get a coffee, and people stopped talking when I passed. They didn't wave. They watched. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the danger. I was the one who was about to blow the lid off the town's polite secrets. I could win legally, but I was losing socially. I was becoming a pariah. The girl who destroyed her sister. The girl who ruined the nice family lawyer. I didn't care. On the eve of the hearing, I was at the house, packing up the last of the papers in the study. My phone chimed. A text message. Dylan Kessler. I opened it. I resigned today. I am moving to Philly. I can't be there when the judge asks me where the files went. A second text followed. He is going to blame you. He has a new story. He's going to say you and Veronica conspired to defraud the estate, and he was the victim. Don't let them make you the story. I stared at the screen. Graham was going to pivot. He was going to throw Veronica under the bus to save himself, and he was going to try to drag me under with her. He was going to claim he was just a helpless trustee caught between two greedy, criminal daughters. I slept fitfully that night. I dreamed of the ledger. In the dream, the pages were burning, and the smoke smelled like my father's peppermint candy. The morning of the hearing was cold and bright. The sun glared off the snow that had fallen overnight, blindingly white. I dressed carefully. A gray suit, low heels, no jewelry. I met Samantha at the courthouse steps. She looked fierce. We have the foundation records, she said. We have the bank transfers. We have the proof that Graham was paying hush money. Do we have the waiver? I asked. No, she said, but we have something better. I subpoenaed Leonard Vale's billing records. He billed for drafting of settlement and waiver 2 years ago. He billed your father 3 hours for it. That is proof it exists, I said. It is proof he knows it exists, she corrected, which means he is lying to the court every time he stands up. We walked through the metal detectors. The air in the courthouse was stale and tense. We went to the courtroom on the second floor. The hallway was crowded. I checked my watch. It was 8:55. The elevator doors opened. Graham Pell stepped out. He wasn't wearing his usual tweed jacket. He was wearing a sharp charcoal suit that looked brand new. He wasn't carrying his battered briefcase. He was carrying nothing, and he wasn't alone. Walking beside him was a man I had never seen before. He was younger than Graham, with slicked back hair and a face that looked like it was carved out of granite. He carried a slim leather folio. He wasn't a local probate lawyer. He moved like a city litigator, a fixer. Graham saw me. He didn't smile. He didn't look nervous. He looked at me with a cold, detached pity. Then he looked past me. I turned. Veronica and Leonard were coming down the hall from the other direction. Leonard looked tired. Veronica looked heavily medicated. Her eyes were glassy. Her movements slow. Graham leaned over and whispered something to the new attorney. The new attorney nodded, a sharp, singular motion. They didn't wait for Leonard. They didn't acknowledge him. They walked straight past Veronica as if she were a piece of furniture. I saw the look on Leonard's face. It was the look of a man who realizes, too late, that the lifeboat has left without him. Graham is cutting them loose, I whispered to Samantha. Samantha narrowed her eyes. He has hired expensive counsel, she said. That means he isn't playing for the estate anymore. He is playing for his liberty. He is going to sacrifice Veronica to the judge. He is going to say he was coerced. Coerced by whom? I asked. By the unstable, criminal daughter who had already committed a felony. Samantha said. He is going to paint himself as the victim of the Ward family. I looked at Veronica. She was staring at Graham's back, confusion clouding her face. She didn't understand. She thought Graham was her partner. She thought they were in this together. She didn't realize that in Graham's ledger. She was just another liability to be written off. The bailiff opened the courtroom doors. All rise, he bellowed. I walked in. I took my seat. I looked at the empty witness stand. Today, the truth was going to come out. But it wasn't going to be the clean, redeeming truth I had hoped for. It was going to be messy. It was going to destroy my family name. But as I looked at Graham Pell, arranging his pens on the table with precise, steady hands. I knew one thing: I wasn't going to let him win. The courtroom was a theater of mahogany and silence. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands folded on top of the notebook where I had cataloged the lies of the last 3 weeks. To my right, Samantha Rhodes was arranging her files with the precision of a surgeon laying out scalpels. To my left, the gallery was sparsely populated. Marla Haynes was there, wearing her Sunday best, and a few local reporters who usually covered zoning board disputes were slouching in the back row. Sensing that the Ward estate hearing had finally bled enough to be interesting, Graham Pell took the stand first. He did not look like a man who had staged a break-in at his own office 24 hours earlier. He looked like the bedrock of Briar Glen. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than my car, and his silver hair was brushed back to perfection. He projected an air of weary patience, the dutiful servant exhausted by the squabbling of ungrateful children. Mr. Pell, his new attorney, a sharp-faced man named Mr. Sterling, began. "Can you describe your relationship with the late Thomas Ward?" Graham smiled, a sad, nostalgic expression. "Thomas was my oldest friend. I managed his affairs for 30 years. I was the one he called when he was sick. I was the one he trusted to protect his legacy. And how would you characterize the administration of his trust?" "It was challenging," Graham said, turning slightly to address Judge Holloway. "Thomas had a complex family situation. His daughter Veronica had significant needs. His daughter Kylie was estranged and living in Chicago. Thomas wanted to balance his love for both of them, but he was afraid of conflict. My job was to act as a buffer." Mr. Sterling nodded. "And since Thomas's death, how has the petitioner, Kylie Ward, behaved?" Graham sighed. He looked at me then, his eyes filled with a disappointment that felt almost physical. "She has been aggressive," he said softly. "From the moment she arrived, she has been suspicious. She showed up at my office with spreadsheets and demands before the funeral flowers had even wilted. She has been stalking my employees. She has been harassing vendors. It feels less like grief and more like a calculation. She seems very organized for someone who claims to be devastated." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. He was twisting my search for truth into predation. He was making my competence look like guilt. Mr. Sterling sat down. Samantha stood up. She did not smile. She walked to the podium and placed a single piece of paper on the wood. "Mr. Pell," she said, "you described your role as a buffer. Is that a legal term?" "No," Graham said, his tone cooling. "It is a description of my fiduciary duty to keep the peace. And does keeping the peace involve creating shell companies?" "Objection." Mr. Sterling barked. "Argumentative." "Sustained," the judge said, though he was watching Graham closely. "Let me rephrase." Samantha said. She picked up the paper. "I am looking at the transaction history for the Briar Glen Community Foundation. Specifically, the donor-advised fund you manage. Can you explain why the trust issued checks to a company called North Hollow Consulting, which were then deposited into this charitable fund, and then immediately dispersed to a criminal defense firm in Harrisburg?" Graham didn't flinch, but his fingers tightened on the armrest of the witness chair. "That was a privacy structure," he said. "Thomas wanted to pay for certain legal expenses for Veronica without it appearing on his personal bank statements. He was a private man." "So you admit the money wasn't for consulting?" Samantha asked. "It was for family administration," Graham said. Samantha picked up another document. "And what about the $20,000 transferred 3 days before Thomas died? The bank records show it went to the same defense firm. Did Thomas sign that transfer request?" "He gave verbal approval," Graham said. "As I have stated, he was too weak to sign." Samantha looked at the judge. "Your Honor, Article 7 of the trust instrument requires written authorization for any disbursement over $500. Mr. Pell is admitting, on the record, that he transferred $20,000 of trust assets based on a conversation that nobody else heard. It was his wish," Graham snapped, his composure slipping for a fraction of a second. "Or was it your desperation?" Samantha asked. because the billing records from that law firm show they were threatening to drop Veronica's case for non-payment. Objection. Mr. Sterling shouted. The judge waved his hand. Move on. Miss Rhodes? Samantha stepped closer to the witness stand. Mr. Pell, let's talk about the ledger. The one you claim was stolen by vandals last night. It was a tragedy, Graham said, recovering his mask. We are devastated. I am sure you are, Samantha said. But it is convenient, isn't it? That the only physical record of your legacy system disappeared the night before this court was scheduled to review it? I cannot control the criminal element. Ms. Rhodes, no, Samantha said, but you can control the narrative. No further questions. Graham stepped down. He looked confident. He thought he had survived the skirmish. He thought the missing ledger was his shield. Then Veronica took the stand. My sister looked fragile. She wore a black dress that hung loosely on her frame, and she clutched a tissue in her left hand. When she spoke, her voice was a tremulous whisper. I just wanted to take care of him, she told her lawyer. Leonard Vale. Leonard looked pale, his eyes darting around the room as if looking for an exit. Kylie wasn't there. Veronica continued, weeping softly. She was in Chicago. She didn't see him decline. She didn't see the nights he woke up confused. I carried this family. I was the one who drove him to the doctors. I was the one who made sure he ate. And yes, he helped me financially, because he knew I had given up my life for him. She looked at me, her eyes hardening through the tears. She calls me a leech. Veronica sobbed. But I was a daughter, a real daughter. The gallery murmured sympathetically. She was good. She was selling the story of the martyr, the sacrificial lamb who was being persecuted by the cold, city-dwelling sister. Leonard Vale sat down. Samantha stood up. She didn't walk to the podium this time. She stood right at our table, holding a file. Ms. Ward, Samantha said, you say you carried the family. You say your father supported you out of gratitude. Yes, Veronica said, dabbing her eyes. Then why did he hire a mediator 2 years ago to draft a settlement agreement between you? Veronica froze. The tissue stopped moving. I don't know what you are talking about. Samantha pulled a document from the file. I have here an invoice from Leonard Vale, dated 2 years ago. The description of services reads, drafting of settlement agreement and waiver of claims. Ward matter. Samantha looked at Leonard Vale, who was staring at his shoes. Then she looked back at Veronica. If your father was giving you money out of love, why did he need a legal contract? And why did that contract require you to sign a waiver of all future claims against his estate? Veronica's mouth opened and closed. She looked at Graham. Graham was staring straight ahead, his jaw set like stone. He didn't look back at her. There was no waiver, Veronica said, her voice rising in pitch. We talked. We had a family meeting. That was all? So you deny signing a document that gave you a lump sum of $15,000 in exchange for leaving him alone? It wasn't to leave him alone, Veronica shouted. It was for the accident. The room went silent. Samantha waited. She let the silence stretch until it was agonizing. The accident, Samantha repeated. You mean the incident where you injured a pedestrian while driving under the influence? Veronica looked wild now. Her eyes darted from the judge to me to Graham. He paid for it, she screamed. He paid for the lawyer. He said it was handled. He promised me nobody would ever know. Samantha lowered her voice. So the money wasn't a gift. Ms. Ward, it was hush money, and the condition of that money was that you would stop asking for more. But you didn't stop, did you? You kept asking, and when he died, and the money stopped, you sued your sister to keep the cash flowing. No, Veronica shrieked. She stood up in the witness box. I deserved it. He owed me. I stayed. She was unraveling. The martyr mask had dissolved, revealing the terrified, desperate woman beneath. And the waiver? Samantha asked relentlessly. The page that is missing from the trustee's file? Did you sign it? Veronica looked at Graham. Help me. Her eyes screamed. But Graham did nothing. I signed a paper, Veronica whispered, collapsing back into the chair. But Graham said he would get rid of it. A gasp went through the gallery. Graham said he would get rid of it? Samantha asked. Yes, Veronica cried, pointing a shaking finger at the defense table. He told me last week. He said, don't worry about the waiver. Ronnie, I pulled it from the file. Nobody will ever see it. Graham Pell stood up. Objection, he roared. This is hearsay. The witness is lying. Judge Holloway slammed his gavel. Sit down. Mr. Pell, I am being slandered by a woman who is clearly unstable, Graham shouted. I never destroyed any document. The courtroom was chaos. Veronica was sobbing. Graham was red-faced. Leonard Vail looked like he was about to faint. Judge Holloway banged the gavel again, a sound like a gunshot. Silence, he bellowed. The room quieted instantly. The judge looked at Graham. Then he looked at Veronica. Then he reached under his bench and pulled out a large red leather book. My heart stopped. It was the ledger. Mr. Pell, the judge said, his voice dangerously calm. You testified earlier that this book was stolen by vandals last night. Graham stared at the book. All the color drained from his face. He looked like a wax figure melting under heat. I was told. Graham stammered. You were told wrong, the judge said. You see, after I issued the order for in-camera review, I was concerned about the security of the evidence. Given the irregularities Ms. Rhodes raised, I issued a writ of assistance to the Sheriff's Department. They retrieved this ledger from Unit 404 of the self-store on Route 9 at 5 o'clock yesterday afternoon. The judge opened the book. Your vandals, Mr. Pell, broke into an empty room. Graham sank into his chair. He didn't look at his lawyer. He looked at the exit sign. The judge turned a page. I have reviewed this ledger, the judge said. It is quite illuminating. It details payments to North Hollow, payments to V. Ward, and payments to L. Vail. But there is one entry that I found particularly interesting. The judge held the book up. On the page dated August 14th, 2 years ago, there is a handwritten note in the margin. It appears to be in your handwriting. Mr. Pell, it reads, V. Signed waiver, retained separately. The judge lowered the book. Retained separately. The judge repeated, not destroy, which means the waiver exists, and it means you, Mr. Pell, intentionally separated a material legal document from the main file to conceal it from the beneficiaries and this court. Graham stood up again. He was trembling. She made me do it, he shouted, pointing at Veronica. She threatened me. She said she would tell everyone about the loans. What loans? The judge asked. The loans I took, Graham yelled. The estate had cash. I needed liquidity for a development deal. I borrowed it. I was paying it back, but she found out. She said if I didn't keep paying her bills, she would report me to the Bar Association. You liar, Veronica screamed from the witness stand. You promised me. You said, I will take care of you. Ronnie, just like your dad did. You said I would never be embarrassed. I was being blackmailed, Graham shouted, by a leech. That word, leech. I watched them turn on each other, the polished trustee and the grieving daughter, ripping each other apart in open court. It was ugly. It was visceral. It was the truth. My father hadn't left us a fortune. He had left us a hostage situation, and now, the hostages were shooting the captor. Judge Holloway watched them for a moment, his expression one of profound disgust. Then he banged the gavel. Order. The bailiff stepped toward Graham. Graham slumped into his chair, burying his face in his hands. Veronica was weeping into her hands, rocking back and forth. The judge looked at me. Ms. Ward, he said. I stood up. We have a situation here, the judge said. Mr. Pell has admitted to commingling funds and concealing documents. Mrs. Ward has admitted to receiving hush money and attempting to enforce a claim she had waived. The fraud is evident. Graham's new lawyer, Mr. Sterling, shot up. Your Honor, may we approach? The judge waved them forward. Samantha motioned for me to come with her. We stood at the bench. The wood was high, making us feel like children. Mr. Sterling spoke fast, his voice a low hiss. Your Honor, my client is prepared to resign immediately. He will offer full restitution of the missing $60,000. He will waive all trustee fees. In exchange, we ask that the record be sealed regarding the specific admission of the loans. We want to settle this as a civil breach of duty, not a criminal matter. He looked at me. Ms. Ward gets her full inheritance, plus the repayment. She walks away with everything she is owed. We avoid a public scandal that would ruin the firm and, frankly, destroy your sister's life. If this goes to the district attorney, Veronica is looking at extortion charges, and the vehicular assault case will be reopened. I looked at Veronica. She was still in the witness box, looking small and broken. Samantha leaned close to me. It is a good deal. Kylie, she whispered, you get the money. You get the win. And you don't have to send your sister to prison. I looked at Graham. He was watching me, his eyes pleading. He was offering me money to save his reputation. I looked at the judge. He was waiting. I thought about the voicemail. Stop digging. I thought about the ledger. Keep quiet. I thought about my father. Paying and paying and paying, just to keep the peace. If I took the deal, I was doing exactly what he did. I was paying for silence. I was letting the rot stay under the floorboards, just so the house would look pretty from the street. I took a deep breath. No, I said. Mr. Sterling blinked. Mrs. Ward, the offer is full restitution. I don't want his money. I said, I want the truth on the record. Kylie, Samantha warned, if we push for criminal findings, it will be a circus. The press is already here. This will be on the news tonight. I don't want a circus. I said, but I won't sign a confidentiality agreement, and I won't seal the record. I looked up at the judge. Your Honor, I said, I am asking for full restitution to the estate. I am asking for Mr. Pell's immediate removal, and I am asking you to refer this matter to the State Disciplinary Board and the District Attorney for investigation. But, I added, looking at Veronica, I am not asking for a finding of extortion against my sister today. I am asking that the investigation determine who was driving this. I want the facts to decide, not a backroom deal. The judge looked at me for a long, long time. He nodded. A slow, grave movement. So ordered, he said. He sat back and addressed the courtroom. The court finds that Graham Pell has breached his fiduciary duty. He is removed as trustee effective immediately. He is ordered to repay $62,000 to the Ward estate within 30 days. The judge paused. Furthermore, the court refers the transcript of this hearing, along with the ledger and the testimony regarding the loans and the accident, to the Office of the District Attorney for review regarding potential criminal conduct. The record will not be sealed. He banged the gavel. This court is adjourned. The sound of the gavel was final. Graham didn't move. He sat frozen, staring at the table. He knew what was coming. The investigation would tear his firm apart. His license was gone. His reputation was ash. Veronica stood up slowly. She looked dazed. I walked out of the swinging gate and into the aisle. The reporters were already typing on their phones, sensing the blood in the water. I made it to the hallway before Veronica caught up to me. Kylie, she said. I turned. She looked terrible. Her makeup was streaked, her eyes swollen. She looked 20 years older than she was. You didn't take the deal, she said. No. I said, why? She asked. You could have had the money. You could have just walked away. I couldn't. I said, Dad walked away. Look where it got us. She stepped closer. She reached out a hand, then pulled it back. They are going to investigate, she whispered. They are going to look at the accident. They are going to look at the payments. Yes, I said, if they look too hard. I lose everything, she said. Her voice broke. I lose the house. I lose my freedom. I lose me. Everyone will know. Kylie, everyone will know I am not. She stopped. Not what? I asked. Not the good one, she whispered. I looked at her. You were never the good one. Veronica, I said gently, and neither was I. We were just the leftovers. I checked my watch. It was 11 o'clock. I have to go. I said, where? She asked, panic rising in her voice. "You are leaving? You are going back to Chicago?" "No." I said, "I have to go to the bank. I have an estate to manage." I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I knew she was standing there, in the cold fluorescent light of the hallway, watching me go. I knew she was terrified, not of poverty, not even of prison. She was terrified of the silence. For years, she had filled the silence with noise, with drama, with conflict. She had created a war to avoid facing herself. Now, the war was over. The enemy was defeated, and she was left with nothing but the truth. I walked out of the courthouse and into the blinding winter sun. The air was cold and clean. It hurt to breathe it in. A sharp, stinging pain in my lungs. I wasn't happy. I wasn't triumphant. I felt heavy, carrying the weight of the wreckage I had just pulled down. But as I walked toward my car, I realized something. I wasn't checking my watch to see how much time I had left to endure. I was checking it to see how much time I had to begin. I was Kylie Ward. I was the daughter of a man who tried to buy peace and failed. But I wasn't going to buy it. I was going to build it. Thank you for listening to You Are a Leech. My sister demanded the inheritance. I checked my watch and the trustee. This story was a journey into the dark corners of a family that looked perfect from the street, but was rotting from the inside. We explored how money isn't just currency. It's a language of control, guilt, and love gone wrong. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Are you in a bustling city like Chicago? Or a quiet town like Briar Glen? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed Kylie's fight for the truth, please subscribe to Revenge Stories. We bring you realistic, emotional dramas where justice is served cold, but the feelings run hot. Share your thoughts. Did Kylie make the right choice by refusing the settlement? Should she have protected her sister, or was the truth worth the cost? Until next time.